without sound contamination. Whoops. Okay.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about that? Or is the answer on that?
Yeah. Anybody have a question?
Good job, that's all I can say. Good research. That's amazing.
Okay. The difference between protected locations, sensitive receptors, and receiver sites, and how the LUO addresses those differences. The use of multiple terms, sensitive receptor and protected location, with very similar definitions, introduced confusion into the ordinance. Almost all other ordinances we looked at use just one term. Sometimes they called it one, sometimes the other. We now use only one term. The term receiver site was not used in the present ordinance, nor is it in the proposed one. If you looked at our definitions for protected locations and sensitive receptors presently, they basically, with very minor differences, are copies of each other.
It was one of those double definitions.
Yeah, they had some minor differences, so the proposed replacement just adds them all into one. So you're only using one term through the ordinance instead of two, and thinking, whoa, weren't they just talking about this? Now they're calling it this.
We're going to that a lot.
Yeah.
So is everybody clear on that one? Was there any more discussion?
Any more discussion on that? Or?
Have you made a choice on those? Last I knew you had options on the definitions.
Couple of options. There is, shoot, I don't have that right here with me because it's in an email. But yes, I have a preferred one. We'll have it on here later tonight. But basically it combines everything into one.
Bruce, when you said the final revision on this, I didn't hear that question, but if you can capture that question and that answer and whatever you have for a final on that before we post it, it'd be great.
I'll get it to you right after the meeting when I get home.
Yeah, just write down whatever that person's question was and write down, the answer to it too, so it's included. Okay, but the next question on the wholesale land or protection. I think I understood, I answered this one. I think I understood it correctly. I'm not going to read it out loud. I think you guys can probably read it. Or someone would like to read it out loud in the room, you're welcome to.
Can people in the back read that, or do we need to read it aloud here?
I can answer it.
Okay. Eric wrote this one. So, per the U.S. EPA, long regarded as wastelands, wetlands are now recognized as important features in the landscape that provide numerous beneficial services for people and for fish and wildlife. Some of these services or functions include protecting and improving water quality, providing fish and wildlife habitats, storing floodwaters, and maintaining surface water flow during dry periods. These beneficial services considered valuable to societies worldwide as a result of the inherent and unique natural characteristics of wetlands. Close quotes. Additionally, the town has little control over the development of these areas since the state and multiple federal agencies have a long-established jurisdictional record over these resources. The board is enabling reasonable development on developable land. In the alternative of development, in some cases, developing with industrial or commercial activities provides benefits to the community and society at large with less impact than the alternative residential development. Residences bring with them automobiles, heat energy consumption, frequently in the form of fossil fuels or wood, electrical energy consumption, causing off-site impacts somewhere else in another community, septic waste and maintenance, lawn maintenance, erosion concerns, introduction of non-native plant species, garbage waste, school impact through students, etc. Every community requires a diverse balance of development, and Clifton is currently out of equilibrium of residential development versus non-residential development. Thus, changes in the ordinance in general encourage some commercial or industrial growth.
Should be down the road, EPA's floated some proposed new regulations for any water body, including creek beds that are not year-round.
Yeah.
Things of this sort. It's quite controversial right now. It will be a very broad expansion of their authorities. And I have some of my land, for example, may very well be impacted by it. And I'm sure everybody else here will be in the same boat, which could radically impact on their ability to build a house, or put in a septic system, or anything else, if these proposed rule changes are approved.
I think looking at the whole system, I realize it's new regulations coming for wetlands, man, you're pretty much locked into the only land you can look at for development in any community is your non-wetland development. And I guess what I was just trying to make an effort to do in that answer was to point out that, we have a lot of residences, and I was trying to point out the types of pollution, that people just accept with their residents that would, it's really not talked about that much. So if somebody wants to come in and do a 31 subdivision.
Yes, Dave was just pointing out they've got EPA's getting more involved and they've got a lot of new regulations they're trying to get put in, but it's got to go through vote first before they can do anything.
Yeah, Eric, these new EPA rules would expand EPA's authority on areas that historically have not been considered, wetlands and things like that. I haven't read them, just read media articles on them, but they would be, they might down the road, if these things were approved, would have impact on development here in Clifton, or potentially could have impact.
Well, pretty well the way it works, when the regulations get promulgated, the federal EPA makes, a larger regulation, and the states have to come up with an implementation strategy. I've been most heavily involved directly with that stuff, that protocol, through some of the regulations at my day job when I used to do the environmental management job. I had to work with the main DEP to execute and implement, programs through, that were initially cooperating with the EPA in each state. What we typically do is we work with the EPA and they get some sort of a licensing, so to speak. It's not called a license, it's something else. The word escapes me at the moment, but essentially, the state gets the authority to be the regulator. It has to meet the minimum guidelines. If it doesn't meet the minimum guidelines of the EPA, will become the regulatory authority. It's usually the EPA does not want to be the regulatory authority at the community level. They want the state to do it. So anyway, if anybody wants to change that answer, it'd be good. Everybody understand the question and answer message for that we're trying to accomplish at the moment. And are you agreeable if we posted this answer for the public?
Any comment? No, no comment.
I'm going to take that as a yes for anything else.
Yeah, I'll take it as a
Somebody's
yes.
got to speak up for the group, guys.
Yes.
Okay, Bruce, go ahead. Next one.
Okay, I split this one into two parts because it was really sort of two questions. What is the reasoning behind limiting lower sound standards to a small radius around the home? We will make reference to the following WHO guidelines, World Health Organization. These guidelines are typical of recommended sound limits we have found. In particular, the ones you would want to really take a look at are dwelling indoors, 35 recommended dBA. Inside bedrooms for sleep disturbance nighttime, 30 dBA. They actually, outside bedrooms, recommend 45 dBA as the outdoor limit, well, we're well below that. Those are the ones that really apply most. And preschool bedrooms, 30 dBA. Okay, the explanation behind this is, the purpose of these, school playground outdoor annoyance, they put it at 55 dBA, well above our limits in our ordinance. The purpose of these ordinance standards is to protect the health of people. There are multiple sources for guidelines. Please see documents on the planning board website. Other guidelines have listed 42 to 45 dBA as a level below which there are no adverse health effects and do not interfere with normal activities. The one exception to this is sound interfering with sleep. The sound standard of 35 dBA in our ordinance, which I should add here, applies to residences, ensuring that sleeping and other indoor activities will not be adversely affected. The 35 dBA standard applies standing 100 feet from a residence, and the WHO guidelines say that being indoors normally results in a 15 dB reduction in sound from outdoor levels with a window open. This should result in average indoor sound levels of only 20 dBA. We applied the 35 dBA to all listed sensitive receptors because we do live in a quiet rural area. The majority of people living in the developed world are routinely exposed to much higher sound levels than this, both during the day and night, with no ill effects. That's the reasoning pretty much behind it, is that it's really being overly protective of those people who are concerned about sleep. And sleep disturbance appears to be behind most of the adverse medical effects in all of these different complaints, or the majority of them. Okay, the second half of that same question is, how can the wind energy facility control the noise sufficiently to make it quieter there and not so quiet a couple of 100 feet away? My answer is, the phrasing of this question indicates a possible misunderstanding of sound propagation and how the sound standards actually work in real-world situations. The question as worded appears to imply that the sound within the 100-foot setback from sensitive receptors will always be at 35 dBA, and that when you cross this line 100 feet away, the sound will suddenly be 40 dBA, almost as if you went through a doorway from a quiet room into one with a TV or stereo playing. This is not how it works. First of all, these limits are just that, upper limits. A significant portion of the time, the sound will be quieter. Now let us look at the real-world results of these standards. This picture you see here is of a section of the Pt2 compliance report. Just as a picture, to give you an example, the lines add sound contours.
The section 2, Bruce, is the one just east of here?
No,
No.
that's, up
Dan.
there. This was a map I had, which is why I grabbed a section of it. Okay. The above picture from the final WF Stetson compliance report and is included just to demonstrate the concepts here. Pretend for a moment that CP2, located right here, above is a sensitive receptor per the CLUO ordinance. Notice the sound contour lines. All the areas beyond and the areas to the sides of the sensitive receptor have equal or lower sound levels. Now let's look at what happens in the direction directly in line with the wind turbines. Note the table below. I'll show you the table first. Here's a table done by a sound engineer. This had to do with, I forget just which place. This is actually on the website, if I remember right. Okay. If you look at it, the column of interest is the one under sound power, LW equals 105. This is closest to the sound power for the large wind turbines we are looking at. Note that the Vestas V90 turbines have a rated power of about 103 dB, so the table we are looking at is conservative. That would be this column right here, and these are the distance in feet from the turbine. I'll keep scrolling back and forth on the show. Okay. First, note the expected sound power level at the 4,000 foot distance of 32 dBA. This is a new table, but it was from similar data that the planning board originally decided on the 4,000 foot setback number. Note that using this table as an example, that the 35 dBA number is reached somewhere between 2,750 and 3,000 feet from the turbine. As a conservative estimate, let us say 2,800 feet. The sound does not increase to 40 dBA only 100 feet closer. In fact, the sound rises to 36 dBA at 2,500 feet, a 1 dBA increase 300 feet closer to the turbine or 400 feet from the sensitive receptor using the proposed CLUO standards. A 1 dB change in sound level is considered barely perceptible, and many sources list 3 dB as being the number where most people can hear the difference. Okay, so it doesn't just a couple of 100 feet away get significantly louder. It gets louder much slower. We reach 37 dBA at 2,250 feet from the turbine or 650 feet from the sensitive receptor. We reach 38 dBA at 2,000 feet from the turbine or 900 feet from the sensitive receptor. We reach 39.1 at 1,750 feet from the turbine or 1,150 feet from the sensitive receptor. We reach 40.5 dBA at 1,500 feet from the turbine, so a conservative estimate for 40 dBA would be 1,600 feet, or 1,300 feet from the sensitive receptor. So the reality is a much wider area that's effectively being protected from unreasonable sound than just the 100-foot written into the standard. This is how it works in the real world. It's not like going through a door. You're outdoors. In the real world, these numbers will be affected to some extent by local topography. That is why a predictive sound study is done, and the lines are not perfectly smooth curves. And that is why we do compliance testing afterwards as well. The concept is accurate and is supported by the sound contour lines on the predictive models and by actual compliance testing done on existing wind farms. And there is your distances for a sound power of 105. I don't even know why they put one in here for 110, because I don't know of any turbines I've seen that are up in that range. And 100 is lower than most of them. So the 105 actually is almost right on for a GE 1.5 megawatt turbine. But the Vestas is, I think, at around 103, and the newer turbines coming that they're building now are supposedly even quieter.
Bruce, can I ask you a question on this? Is this pre-construction or is this data
This is predicted right here. And that's why you actually do a sound survey, because these values will change some based on the topography. If there's something between you and the turbine, it'll be quieter.
At the bottom of the page, I went through and I actually made a Excel spreadsheet and did this. I made a graph that I'll show maybe next week or somewhere. Still, I was curious. And I wanted to do it. It's amazing how if you go and you just run this basic formula, which is basically sound at standard temperature and pressure, in the real world, these numbers are not really substantially different
answer to that one. Next
Any
one,
question about that?
yeah, anybody have any questions about that?
I do. Just one.
Go ahead.
I just have one question. Is the frequency of the sound computed in that calculation? Because sound travels differently depending on what frequency the sound is.
In this calculation, I do not think it takes frequency into effect. I think it takes essentially any range frequency. There are some deviations, and we can provide some tables I looked at them that show that. And they definitely are different depending on what frequency they are. But this, I believe, is based on an A range frequency, which they're very close inside this A range.
So this frequency that you used is similar to whatever the windmills put out.
It's similar to the frequency that people hear that wind turbines put out.
Okay, thank you.
Range.
Thank you.
Bruce, is that accurate?
That's relatively accurate. Really low frequencies sometimes propagate in a cylindrical rather than a spherical. However, when you look at the actual sound power levels, again, you can look at all of our data on the website for all the different studies. When you get out at these different distances, the sound power levels of those low frequencies are so low and you can't hear them. It's immaterial at these distances.
Something I know about low frequencies is that you may not have to hear them for them to do damage. That's so. But if your frequencies fall within this other range, I'm not really all that concerned.
I think that 55 decibels, I believe, and maybe Bruce did an answer to a question later on, as far as low frequency, are we going to get to I think that low frequency question later on.
I don't think there's a separate low frequency question here. However,
Let me just say,
in general, those low frequencies you're talking about, in order to cause damage, they've got to be at an audible level.
75 or above.
There's a lot of controversy over that. But yeah, 75 or above before you get into anything. And most of,
Wait a minute, 75 or above before I get into what?
before you get into any possible effects.
To be honest, I took music lessons as a student at the University of Maine. And one of the things my professor told me that is at 11 frequency, a sound that we really don't pick up, you can break walls and you can stop people's hearts and you can do all sorts of things at 11. So if we're not,
the only way you can do
but you
that
don't
is,
hear it.
no, you will hear it at that level. You will feel it. Because in order to break walls and do other things, you're talking about decibel levels in
I'm talking about the
150.
frequency that it
Right,
comes out.
there is a decibel level in every frequency.
I hear your question, you're not really answering it the way you understand it should, because she's right. But it's the frequency and the decibel together. The decibel is the measurement of the power. Okay, so if you had a frequency of 11, but a sound power of like 10 decibels, it's going to do absolutely nothing. So, but if you have a decibel, if you have a frequency of 11, with a sound power of like 75 decibels, or 90 decibels, or 100 decibels, that is something that can do damage. That's absolutely correct. But it has to be at the power. The maximum power at the low frequency is going to be allowed is 55 decibels. So it's well below the power that you would need to cause damage, even to things that you can't hear.
Thank you.
Definitely. Okay, do you understand that? Did I answer your question?
Absolutely, I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Bruce, you kind of agree with that, see where I go with that?
Yeah, it's just, when we talk about breaking walls and doing that sort of damage, you're talking about decibel levels in the 150 to 200 decibel range. You're talking about something, yeah.
Any other questions on this before we move on?
Oh, yes, there's more questions.
No, I'm wondering if anybody else had any more.
I do actually. Back up at the top, when you were talking about a doorway
Yes.
from the 35 to the 40, you was kind of going backwards from what we was talking about. If I was standing 100 feet away from my house and it's 40 dBA allowed, how is it going to be 35 at my house?
It's not going to be. If the 35 at your house is the controlling one.
So there shouldn't be allowed 40 dBA.
Well,
100
you have
feet away.
It's always controlled by the most stringent. That would be like if you're going on a highway and the general speed limit by state law is, I think on most highways is 55?
65.
Okay, well, no, I think it's state highways,
Oh,
not in state,
yeah.
55. When you come to a school zone, it's 15 during certain hours. You can't go 55 through there at that time. The lower limit sets the limit.
So why
So
are we even saying 40 at 100 feet away?
Because,
If
well, we
it's-
don't
if
say
it's-
that, you're confusing a limit with what it will actually be. And what, okay, I don't know how to get around this because I don't think you understand.
Well, I don't think you understand that we're asking,
The issue here is, those limits are reached at the peak speeds, those are the peak power generation. So if you're trying to generate 1.5 megawatts or 2 megawatts or whatever the rating of a particular device is, you need to be, acting at, the wind speeds of the 25 to 30 mile per hour range. I guess the answer, in my view, would be the wind doesn't blow constantly at 20 to 30 miles per hour frequently. It blows at 5, 6, 10 miles per hour. And so the sound will be considerably less. But at whatever time periods it does blow at 20 to 30 miles per hour, there's a potential that it could create, an undesirable sound or noise output, and that's why those regulations are in place. Is that kind of answer your question, more, and feel free to continue to ask questions about it until you get where you need to get.
Okay, I guess what we're pointing out is it has to be 35, 100 feet from your house,
within 100 feet.
within 100 feet.
But if I'm
There is
101,
no way for it to be 40 at 101 feet. It can't happen or you'll be breaking the tighter regulation.
okay.
Right,
We
so
can-
why not make it 35 out there, if you can't make it, if you make it 35 here, and it's not possible for it to be 40 there if it has to be 35 here, why let it be 40 there?
Well, at some point you have to say the 35 ends.
Well, I mean, so we've got these little nodes all over town of 35s surrounded by 40s.
Would you like me to, no, I don't know. I don't know how, you're regulating it at 40, yes, but don't you see that the regulated area, because of the 35, they're not little tiny nodes. They're actually, the protected areas are actually much larger.
So why aren't we writing it
100
as larger?
feet, you know,
Excuse me?
You put 100 feet, correct?
Yeah.
a radius of 100 feet around a house is 200 feet plus the width of the house.
Didn't you see where we just showed, first of all, everything downwind and to the sides is going to be that or lower. So if you've got a house right here, and there's a wind turbine up here, everything from here down is lower.
But
The
the house
sound
next,
doesn't get louder on the other side of the house.
but the house next door is 500 feet closer to the turbine.
Right? So,
So their sound limit area is not the same as the one that you're speaking of
okay,
first.
let's put it another way. Here's house A up here, here's house B down here.
Right,
House B never even has to worry about it because they're further away than House A. House A is the one closer to the turbine. It's going to
but
be,
maybe the,
it's going to be 35 dBA. House. What you're saying is we've got this circle where it's 35, and
right,
we're allowing it to be 40 outside, and this one is 35, and we're allowing it to be 40 out here.
right,
The reality is, with a turbine up here, is that everything from here down is 35 or under.
It's supposed to be. How could, I mean, you can't say it is, you say the limit is, but you can't say that's what, if you measure the sound, that's what it's gonna be, right? If it's violating it, it will be more than 35.
Right, and that's why we have a violation section.
Right, so what we're saying, I don't know what Jessica was, if she wants to put in a different point, but what I'm saying is, how can you regulate 200 feet out of acres?
Hey, Bruce, and I don't know who's speaking there, obviously, because we can't see each other. I'm sorry about that tonight. I think that we do answer a question about the operational permitting later on, and I think that would be a good time to readdress that question.
Yeah, the problem is what they're bringing up are hyper-theoreticals that are effectively impossible.
Well, everything's hypothetical at this point.
Just you and I on that, that's just the way it is, that's okay. I mean, I think the issue is the control, and I believe, if you look at the operational permitting and the control that we're proposing, I think can answer at least one of the questions. I mean, it may be a wall, but I think there's a better chance of answering it, in terms of how it's regulated with the, in-place microphones, that record 24/7, and also the inspection protocol where the stuff can actually be measured as opposed to stuff that, it's not really possible to measure, the way it's set up now. I think the new setup, for controlling and doing the regulatory, enforcement side of it, I think the enforcement structure that's being built into the revision is much more adequate to make sure people get taken care of. So, don't you kind of agree with that, Bruce? I mean, we've talked about this quite a bit.
Yeah.
If you point at those lines, anything, each line is a dB, right?
Right.
One particular dB everywhere. And
Right.
when you go beyond it, it gets a little less.
It keeps getting
Each
less.
line is-
See, that's the thing, even if you have a spot down here, well, let's say, for instance, we take it that, of course, these lines are higher than that, but let's say this was your house with a 200-foot circle, and it was limited to 35 dBA, 100 feet from it. Everything further on is protected automatically. There is no places where it's suddenly going to be 40 dBA. The point is, it is not going to suddenly become 40 dBA that 100 feet from a house. It can't be, because the 35 dBA regulation is the more stringent and overrides it.
So why don't you just say 35 from 4,000 feet out?
Because that's not practical.
35?
No, we have it at, I believe,
40.
40 or 45? 40, I
35
think.
within, near,
40.
well, it depends, 35 within 100 feet of a sensitive receptor, 40 elsewhere.
We could simply say, why don't we make it 30 all over the whole town and say, nobody can drive a car? I mean, you can get a little foolish on this.
Really? Oh.
Yes, I have to put it that way. I may not be politically correct, but it's never going to be allowed because of the 35 to be 40 at 100 feet from. If it was 40 from 100 feet from the house, then they would be absolutely in non-compliance at the sensitive receptor at the house. There's no way they could be in compliance. They'd be in violation, and they'd have to make changes. But that's the whole point. It never is going to be 40 there.
How much is the tractor trailer truck owned by?
So you're,
That's a good question. My whole house.
You can actually put house on that thing.
so you're assuming,
Yeah, we're assuming.
I believe the ones you put up there were asbestos. You're assuming asbestos, whatever. What about some other turbine? Are you writing this ordinance for one turbine?
No. Other turbines would have to meet these same standards. And a different turbine, for instance, if you were putting GE turbines up there, they'd have to be further away because at least the GE 1.5s are louder. Some of the new Vestas turbines are quieter. They could actually be closer.
Well,
The defining factor
so
for
you're saying
protecting
that
people is
even if they met the site setback, you don't think they would necessarily meet the sound standard?
Not the GE, no, they wouldn't meet the sound standards. But the new Vesta, the one in the building now, you could put them closer to the houses and they'd still meet the sound standards. Because I have looked up, I have been reading on the new ones that have got coming out. They say the Vestas are quieter than the old ones.
Yeah, even GE's new ones are quieter, but I haven't looked up the actual figures. The 1.5s are what have been used a lot by First Wind, and that's because they got a bargain on hundreds of them.
Well, not only them, but the Freedom ones and the Vinyl Haven. Those aren't First Wind, but they're GE 1.5.
Yes, but if you take a look at Vinyl, I'm not going to get an argument on Vinyl Haven, but the problem with Vinyl Haven is they put them all too close to the residents.
Yeah, because there was only so much space on the islands.
But I mean, that's the biggest problem with Vinyl Haven, is they put them too close to the.
Yeah.
And also, I believe that on the islands, I believe the case was that their consultant told them not to do it. They did it anyway.
Yeah.
The thing is, some turbines just plain might not be able to fit. If you had a really noisy turbine, it might not be able to comply with our ordinance at all, with these standards.
Well, I would hope not.
Because we got,
Ours is, if you look at all the other ordinances, yes, there are some that are even tighter. In most cases, they're designed to ban them, let's face it. Some turbines that are noisier would not be possible to put in Clifton because of the strictness of our ordinance. Anywhere. You could use our ordinance in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and some turbines, they wouldn't be able to put there even if there was nobody within 100 miles, because at 4,000 feet, they're still too noisy.
I would
The
say
new ones being built, they're making improvements all the time. They're getting quieter, which means if anything,
Well-
as technology advances and they're making them quieter, our ordinance is going to be overly strict at that 4,000 feet. Some of the new ones could comply with our standards of 3,500.
So the first one, let me ask your question.
So you said that the purpose of ordinances that have stricter standards than ours is to ban wind turbines. I would suggest to you that that's up to those people in that town whether they felt that there was enough space to safely put those wind turbines there. That it was their judgment that they needed that much setback to protect their citizens. And I wouldn't say it was, we don't want wind turbines here, but their judgment was wind turbines won't fit there.
Yeah, but isn't that a charade then? Why don't they just ban them?
Of course it is.
Why even have an
Of course
ordinance?
it is.
What, well,
Why don't you just ban them like we don't allow?
because that's not, there's a difference between banning something because you don't want it, and there's a between regulating something, and if
That
it
you know you'll
can't
never
meet
have.
that regulation, then it can't be there.
okay.
And you
Yeah,
have to have a
we're
rationale
not
for
getting
the
anywhere
regulation.
because what it amounts to is that courts have in general said very often you can't strictly ban something. So the legal loophole has been to regulate something in a way that it can't be done. Pretty much it's done all the time, whether you like it or not. And that comes down to a philosophical discussion on whether you believe it is right to ban something one way or another, even if you have to use a loophole to do so. For instance, I think it's the Phillips ordinance that I re-looked up. that if you've got like 5 or 6 wind turbines, I think you're out to like 15 miles or something that they're required to be from people's houses. It's got standards that I'm like, who are you kidding here?
Okay, let's move on to the next question.
Okay, this is what's the reasoning behind not adding an expiration to the land use ordinance. And I know we answered this question before. Actually, we did answer the question before, but the only thing we did do in the current ordinance that we talked about a little bit last week, I did research the economic development rules, and I laid those economic development rules out, and I laid out who's allowed to do that, and who's not allowed to do that, and ensured that the public understood that rule, and also made sure that it was clear the planning board is not covered by any of those sort of privacy rules, so to speak, or confidentiality rules. But I can't think of a good reason why there should be an ethics ordinance and a land use ordinance that wouldn't affect everybody else. Can anybody think of that at all?
Okay, I didn't hear what you said at the end.
I said, can anybody think of a reason why, a good reason for putting it? I can't think of a good reason why it's a good idea to put this in the land use ordinance, but why it wouldn't be a good thing to have it for everybody in town. I mean, if somebody in the room can speak to why it's a good idea to have it in the land use ordinance, as opposed to having it apply to everybody, I mean, I'd like to hear it.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Did anybody hear his response?
Go ahead and elaborate.
I can't hear what we said, Jill.
I just asked if everybody heard the response that you made to that.
Right, okay. So we'll go to the next question then.
How is allowing wind energy facilities in Growth Area 3 consistent with the intent of the Clifton Comprehensive Plan for preserving that area of town for recreational use development? Okay. GMA 3 has several thousand acres of preserved land through land trusts, tree growth tax law, protected wetlands, and various other constraints, including a lack of road access. A few hundred acres developed in wind energy has almost no direct footprint on recreational use. While the board acknowledges there are people for whom the visual impact of wind turbines detracts from their recreational experience, a vast majority of people enjoy the view, are unaffected, or quickly become accustomed to changes on the visual horizon. Access to privately owned land is not guaranteed, as we've all seen from large tracts of land purchased by Roxanne Quimby and her land trusts